The philosopher, Sir Roger Scruton, is with me today. He is one of the most distinguished philosophers of our age. Some have called him the greatest conservative philosopher since Edmund Burke. He's the author of more than 50 books. He's also written an opera, several novels. During the Cold War, he made several trips to Prague, where he had clandestine philosophy seminars around the city. He was eventually arrested, expelled from the country, and placed on an index of undesirable persons. Later, when freedom returned, Roger was awarded the Czech Medal of Merit. The factual feminist is proud to say that he has been my friend and ally for many years. Roger, welcome to AEI.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's so lovely to have you here. And you were recently knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, and I want to congratulate you for that. I'm not sure what I should call you.
I think you can still call me Roger.
Sir Roger, Lord Sovereign, I don't know. I immediately wondered about your father, your late father. He was from a working class background, and he had a lot of, let's say, resentment toward the upper class. And when you were admitted to Cambridge University, he was very angry. How would he feel about knighthood?
Well, he wouldn't be pleased, but and one part of him wouldn't be pleased, but another part might be pleased, because he was a contradiction. Like so many people who had come from the bottom, he felt that it was a great achievement not to be what he was, but nevertheless he must retain the loyalty to what he was. And seeing me blithely, youthfully striding ahead was intolerable for him, and I can understand that. But in the end, he was awarded an honour by the Queen at one stage because he was an ardent environmentalist who devoted a lot of his life to defending our little local town from the abuse of the developers. And he organised a local society for the protection of the town. And this work was eventually recognised with a little, the medal, the MBE, which is a much coveted thing.
And he was happy with that?
He had real problems with it, but he accepted it. And on his grave in High Wycombe, on the tombstone, it says Jack Scruton, MBE. And that is, we felt that does actually recognise what the deep part of him wanted.
For millennials out there, many of the followers of the factual feminist are college age or younger, and they may have been in schools, universities where conservatism was denigrated or simply not represented. So how do you define conservatism, and what are its virtues?
Well, this has been my life's work to define conservatism. At a certain stage, I realised that I was a conservative without knowing quite what it was. Let's say in May 1968 in Paris, when I saw all the students protesting on behalf of essentially nothing, not knowing what they wanted, knowing only what they were against, I felt this is outrageous, that they should be listened to. If people's feelings are purely negative, defining themselves in terms of what they dislike or even hate, then they're under an obligation to find something that they love. So I looked around myself for the things that I love, and I decided that they are the things that I already have. Our civilization, the rule of law, the ability to close a door and be secure behind it. All those
that we take for granted. The benefits of civilization.
Exactly, but they were threatened then by these crazy students who had all these benefits.
Yes, it was very much an upper middle class uprising.
Yes, exactly. Well, I observed it from my mansard in the street below in Paris, and it was a revolution supposedly against the bourgeoisie on behalf of the working class. I looked down in the street for representatives of the working class. The only ones I could see were those poor policemen whom they were throwing stones at.
Exactly, and we've seen this now on some of our college campuses.
Exactly. So my thought, anyway, over the many years that I've looked into this question, my thought is that the essential feature of conservatism is love of the actual, love of the things that you've inherited, and a desire to reassert that inheritance, not uncritically, but in the way that you do with your family, your parents, your brothers and sisters. You know their faults, but you love them. They're part of you, and it's your primary duty to affirm that love, and then work for any improvements, of course.
Now, when you say improvements, I can imagine someone from the left responding that, what are you talking about? Conserving? What if what you are conserving is corrupt, full of injustice, institutions where women were second-class citizens and so forth? What do you say?
Everything is imperfect. But the question is, what parts of what you've inherited can be improved and amended? What parts must be thrown away? But what parts are necessary if you're to do any improving at all? Edmund Burke said, we reform in order to conserve. If we don't do it that way, then we risk losing the whole motive for reforming in the first place, because we throw away our identity as social beings.
And it's much easier to tear something apart than to
yeah.
build it. And so heedlessly, we've seen denegrations of beauty in contemporary life, and in education, where young people aren't introduced to great works of the past, or even something like the beauty of the common law.
Yes.
There's not an understanding of where our laws come from. I see students today that suddenly want to dispense with due process or have they would like to change the First Amendment. No understanding of how these came into being.
No, that's right. Well, I think this is where one has to steer a middle course between saying, look, this is our inheritance, accept it, or saying, get rid of all that and let's start again. All attempts to get rid of everything and start again, like the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution or the Nazi Revolution, end up as genocide, because the controls that prevent people from exercising their basic resentment and anger are taken away. So you have to begin from the point that we've inherited something that defines what we are. Let's see now whether we want to improve it in this or that respect. And which parts of it are absolutely fundamental to our being what we are. And you mentioned the common law, which of course is part of the shared inheritance of my country and yours, which most young people don't fully understand. They don't see the amazing achievement of a legal system that has grown out of the resolution of individual conflicts and then the extraction of principles from that, so that it's sensitive at every point to the actuality of human beings.
And developed organically
exactly.
From the ground up, rather than from on high.
Yeah, imposed. See, but it's a natural instinct in intellectuals, and the reason why intellectuals are so dangerous is to impose things from on high, to say, look, we understand everything. We've got the answer to the human problem. Here are the principles. Those are going to be accepted, and we'll deduce from that the application in the individual case. And that's the opposite of how human conflicts are resolved. The principles are deduced from the particular case and not the other way around.
Not the other way around. Mm-hmm. And you have seen this, for example, in the area of art and art history, how there was a tradition of beauty and works of genius, and younger people were taught to appreciate and younger artists to emulate. And then suddenly there were, well, it wasn't sudden, but there was a gradual move in modernity and then post-modernity, and something was lost. And you've talked about this in...
Yeah, this is something that has troubled me, because I've always been interested in the arts. And for me, when I was growing up, I was, like many of my generation, I was looking for something that would represent the civilization that had almost destroyed itself in the Second World War. You know, what was so great? What is the symbol of that I would really want to hold on to? Of course, art, music, and literature became symbols for me. And then I was faced, as all my generation were faced, with the strange puzzle that at a certain stage artists themselves seem to be turning against their vocation. The vocation of art, as I see it, is to produce beautiful things through the beauty of which we understand our own predicament. You know, the human condition, as we know, is full of woes, full of tragedy, and full of
mystery.
mystery, and one of the tasks of art is to reconcile us to this, to show that in the very depths of despair there is beauty which redeems us. And all the great art of the past, you know, right up to Van Gogh and Cézanne and so on, was devoted to this transcendental goal. Suddenly there was a kind of culture of repudiation that came about, and that we don't want this, we can't do it, therefore we're going to condemn it. And you get art like de Kooning and people like that, which became very fashionable in America, devoted to the goal of desecrating the human condition rather than redeeming it. And I think that was, you know, a religious person would say that was the devil's work, but I don't want to put it quite in that way. But there is something in us which wants to destroy, as well as the other thing that wants to affirm. And art is particularly vulnerable to this because, you know, let's face it, at a certain stage in our civilization, the artist became a kind of hero. He was adulated, he was made into the representative of the human spirit for our times. And to get that status became, you know, an object of great desire.
Coveted.
Yeah, people coveted the status of artist. And so any way of getting attention at a certain stage seemed good. So you got all that pop art stuff, or worse, you know, like Tracy Emin putting on display her disordered bed, in
frightening.
which yes, in which all the mess of her daily life is made into a spectacle, and the people will queue to see that spectacle, just as they used to queue to look at crucifixions. But it doesn't follow that the thing is beautiful, and it doesn't follow that they'll go away from this improved or in any way made to reflect on their own condition and be reconciled to it.
Now you have said that you have defended beauty because you say it is a way of finding ourselves, that it is, if we lose it, we lose the meaning of life.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we don't do everything for the sake of beauty. That would be to be an aesthete of the Oscar Wilde type.
Yes, impractical.
Impractical, but also offensive as well, because a large number of people can't live their lives in that way. But nevertheless, there is still in all of us the desire to make things fit, to make things harmonize. You know, when you enter a house where you've been invited to supper, you know, your manners, your language, your gestures all express this desire to fit with these people. You may not know them very well. They will have laid the table so it looks inviting, etc. That's something that human beings spontaneously do, and it's part of making sense of life that we do.
And you see in the cities, in Washington and New York, people go to the parks where as soon as they can get outdoors and some kind of rustic setting, it's a longing in us for...
Yes, there is a longing for beauty, and it isn't just that we want to fit together with our neighbours either. There shines through these very primitive and ordinary experiences of beauty another dimension of being. We don't necessarily notice it in our day-to-day life, or certainly don't have words for it, but just every now and then we'll stop and we'll recognise that we've been granted a window onto the transcendental, and in ordinary people's lives, those little windows that open are absolutely vital, even if they can't describe what it is that they do.
Yes, and we want to keep those, make those available to our children, to one another, and if you look at what's happened with modern architecture,
yes.
which I don't remember your exact words, but something like it's, you know, the greatest crime against beauty has been carried out by the modern architects who built the glass boxes.
Yes, well, it's a crime against the human soul. I want to say that building, and especially the building of cities, is one of the most important enterprises that human beings engage in, because it's their way of marking out a piece of the earth as their shared territory. You know, when you a city is something like Washington is something that all the Washingtonians share. So it really matters how the buildings face onto the street. The typical modern building doesn't face onto the street at all, doesn't have a face. It's just a glass screen on a few steel girders. And it's erected usually on a space that involves destroying all kinds of agreeable habitats. It's not built to last. It'll be pulled down at huge environmental cost in 20 years' time and replaced by an equally hideous thing. Meanwhile, the street, the fabric of the city, the sense of the city as a home to all its dwellers is mutilated and destroyed. And I think it's not the great works of modern architecture that do this. You know, it's the ordinary day-to-day business architecture which is conceived purely as a work of engineering, but which is sweeping away all the texture of the city as we used to know it. And I think this is having an impact on people's lives. The first impact it has is of course drive people out of the city. They don't live in the city anymore.
They don't want to be there.
They retreat to the suburbs and into their own private space, their own silence, instead of being out on the street mingling with each other.
You lived in Boston for many years. Do you remember the Boston City Hall? It was a brutalist. It's still there.
Absolutely horrible, yes.
A horrible building. Then if you look at the old City Hall, it was beautiful Second Empire French design with, you know, it had a mansard roof and very elegant. But this desecration. First of all, it's terrible in every way. It cuts the city in two in ways which make it impossible. And it has an open expanse. No one wants to go there. It's all cement, no trees. And then it's an upside down, you know, concrete cake. Yeah. It's hideous, inside and out. And, you know, people want to tear it down, but it's too expensive.
Right.
What were they thinking? They built it in '68.
Yes, well, we all know that the 60s was the time when everything went wrong. Because it was the time when the baby boom generation matured, or rather they grew into immaturity. And took possession of their inheritance, and their first, like a child being given a precious doll from the play box in the attic, starts pulling it apart. You know, it was like that. The architects at that time decided they were going to pull our inheritance apart, and that was their way of making a mark.
Well, is it stopped? Don't you think we're getting a little better?
Yes. What I was criticising earlier was not the work of the architects who pride themselves on their work, but of the ordinary architect's office, which is occupied by people who have never been educated in architecture. They wouldn't know, for instance, how to draw the shadow on a Corinthian capital in the middle of the day. Or how a campanile looks, or the shadow of a campanile on a sloping roof. Those are the things that architects had to study and know before they could qualify, right up to the Second World War. But thanks to the propaganda of people like Le Corbusier and Gropius, that curriculum was swept away, and all they study now is engineering and isometric drawings. You know, just ground plans repeated 20 times over.
Could we build beautiful cities without bankrupting ourselves, or beautiful towns?
Of course we could. In the long term, a building like this in which we are conducting this interview is much more economical than those 20-story glass boxes.
Yes.
Because it can change its use. People will keep it.
Because they like it.
Yeah, because it's beautiful.
I want to ask you about the universities and some of your work. A recent book is called Fools, Frauds, and Firebrands, Thinkers of the New Left. The Guardian calls it a brilliant and patient demolition. Which fools and frauds and firebrands do you have in mind?
Well, there's an awful lot of them, as you well know. But for example, not all of them are frauds, actually, let's face it. But among the frauds, Deleuze, Lacan, Badiou, Zizek,
Foucault.
And I don't
he's
call
very-
him a
no, I
fraud.
wouldn't
I
call
think
him a
he's
fraud.
a
He's
serious
quite brilliant.
thinker. Yeah, I have a
Althusser.
Althusser. I have a soft spot for Sartre and Foucault.
I do too.
And Sartre was a genius, in fact. But then there are the mere fools who just go on iterating senseless jargon, which if you reproduce it, people think you must be brilliant, that you've seen into the real meaning of that, because I don't see the real meaning of it.
Well, someone once said, a philosopher I greatly admired, and you too, John Stuart Mill, they said, Mill wrote so clearly he could be found out.
Yes, that's a
Well,
very good point.
I consider it a great virtue, clarity, and you go to these postmodernists, and it is a secret language, so it is a kind of initiation. And I think students have maybe their first sort of genuine feeling as though they've had some kind of genuine intellectual experience, and they form a little group.
Yes, I think there is something, what you're talking about, part of the pathology of the human condition, that mumbo jumbo at a certain point gives people the sense of being lifted out of the ordinary mundane life into a realm of illumination, you know,
and greater importance.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes it can be like that. You know, religious initiations in the old world, the mysteries of, you know, of the Greek religion were like that. And the mumbo jumbo was there to give people a sense of a superior authority. And the less it could be understood, the more effective it was.
So there was this obscurantism, but at least in that case it led to a mystical experience or something. I don't know. This seems to lead to the current state in our universities, which is a lot of moral relativism.
Yes.
Students reading history to debunk and to take it apart, to feel superior to our predecessors. And then works of art. You're taught to look at them with a hermeneutic of suspicion.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the phrase.
Well, I do see this as an enormous problem in education. One aspect of it is that the student tends to be given, especially the students come to study literature, and he or she really wants to read Keats and Shelley and you know, the modern classics, Joyce and Faulkner and so on, and instead is given these impenetrable tomes. Deleuze, for instance, is huge. Whatever, all the books are 700 pages long and unintelligible. And after a while, he's not going to be examined on Shelley and Keats. He's going to be examined on this. So he eventually spends his 3 years filling his mind with this impenetrable jargon, just learning how to reproduce it, and losing all love of literature along the way. Because how can you love this stuff?
Yes, and it was last spring, students at Yale protested that there was a course on the major English poets, pre-1800 to 1900, and they focused on Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Spencer, Donne, Pope, Wordsworth. The petition accused them of excluding women, people of color, people on the from the LGBTQ community. Now, there are many courses at Yale that have poets that would, you know, meet female poets and poets of color and so forth. But they were unhappy about this course. And this course is legendary at Yale. It's been taught since the 1920s. And one young woman described herself as being sort of traumatized by her English major at Yale, and particularly this course. And just the idea that they would take a poet, they would take Shakespeare and Milton and Spencer and Donne and put them all in the same category as, you know, dead white men.
Yes.
And
I mean, this is something new, this desire of students to police the curriculum that they've come to learn. You know, when we went to university, as you will remember, we went in due humility, thinking, my God, look, there's masses of knowledge which I need to acquire, and there are people there who are going to teach me. It's not for me to set the curriculum, it's for
Not
them
only
to
that,
set the curriculum.
What the students will say, I don't see myself reflected in the curriculum. I don't, it doesn't validate my identity.
Yeah, well, that's the point of it.
Isn't that the purpose of
Yes,
education, is to introduce you to a larger world and take you out of yourself?
I know. At a certain point, if people go on reacting in that way, the correct response is to say, yeah, that's true. You wouldn't see yourself in this. But since you're so satisfied with yourself, there's no need for you to come to university anyway. So why don't you, here is the front door, out you go.
I want to ask you about some sort of contemporary debates on the campus about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, or the meaning of freedom altogether. But let's talk about freedom of speech. There's an understandable desire on the part of campus administrators to preserve civility. And I'm quite sympathetic with that. I do wish people would be polite and civil. And it would be shocking to me as a teacher if students were saying hideous things to one another in my class, I would tell them to stop. But as soon as they start issuing speech codes, and then enlarging the meaning of hate speech or offense to include simply irritating someone or saying something they don't agree with, then we begin to have almost a ministry of truth and thought and what can be said, what can't be done. Is there some way to resolve this?
There is a great distinction that we should bear in mind between giving offence and taking offence. A lot of education these days is about the art of taking offence.
Yes.
Gender studies is all about this, how to take offence at things which are meant kindly and innocently, but by reading into them some illegitimate denigration of women.
And motives no longer matter. In fact, someone can have good motives. They can, a man can want to open the door for you to be helpful, but that's benevolent sexism.
All that is a way of raising the temperature of ordinary relations between people to the point where they don't dare to engage in them.
This is what I worry, is that it's going to undermine friendship.
Yeah.
With the best way to overcome prejudices, and everyone has them, and you meet someone from somewhere, you know nothing about them, you will have stereotypes. What breaks them down is becoming friends and speaking, casually and not being monitored, not being afraid, not having to tread on
and that's
eggs.
all absolutely true. And I think older people of our generation especially, have a duty to point all this out to young people, to say, look, there are some opinions which we really dislike. I hate the whole Marxist way of looking at society, and I think it has been responsible for some terrible things that have happened. A lot of crimes have their roots in that way of seeing everything in terms of class conflict. But I don't want to stop people from studying Marx or for even from describing their experience in this way. I want them to do it and to engage with them in argument.
You know what I find interesting is that I don't dislike my ideological opponents. I disagree with them. I think they're wrong, but I think they're misguided. And sometimes I'm reading things and I realize that they hate me.
I think that this is a difficulty that I've had as well. I think they're mistaken, but they think that I'm evil because I disagree with them. They have a worldview which is moralized through and through. You've got to have certain beliefs. You've got to, or at least you've got to say certain things. Otherwise, you're outside the fold of the redeemed humanity. And I think that lies behind a lot of these campus attacks on free speech. That the people who are saying the things that they don't like to hear can only be saying them because they're evil and wanting to
Yes.
stir up human beings into some
They want to
terrible
attribute
conflict.
the worst possible motive,
Yeah.
and they do see you as a kind of evil that should be silenced, blotted out, and then
Yes.
and that's why there's suddenly this urge to disinvite people
Yeah,
from campus.
that's
They
right.
take someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali,
Yeah.
and someone I admire so much, and they speak poorly of her and accuse her of all sorts of things.
I know.
I wanted to end by asking you a more general question about freedom. And I heard you quote recently Matthew Arnold, who said that freedom is a very good horse to ride, but to ride somewhere.
Mm.
Well, I think I know what he meant by that, but what does it mean to you?
Well, freedom is, for me, a sine qua non. Without freedom, I don't have the ability to shape my own life, nor the ability to help others shape theirs. So I must have basic freedoms if I am to live a fulfilled life as a human being. But I must also have a sense of what that fulfilled life is or would be. What should I be aiming at? At what point can I look on myself and say, what you are, it's good to be. You know, that is what human happiness consists in. It doesn't consist in pleasure and appetite and, you know, having all the good things, etc. It consists in looking on yourself and saying, that thing is a good thing to be, and I've done it. And it's hard because we every now and then we do have that sense, but then if we are truly worthwhile people, we will quickly think, no, there are things still to be improved. So I think all that Matthew Arnold meant was that just emphasizing freedom doesn't distinguish a good society from an anarchic one. And anarchy leads, in Hobbes's famous words, to life that is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And we want the opposite of all those things.
We want the opposite. And you, because this is the American Enterprise Institute, and we are very pro free enterprise, you are a reluctant capitalist.
Yes.
Explain what you mean. And it's connected with our freedom, because we are free to be happy consumers, but that's a temptation away from the good.
Exactly. For me, economic freedom is absolutely necessary, because there's no other way of managing a big society. Only if people are free to buy and sell, including their own labour, can we ever have any coordination in the economic sphere. And so to that extent, I'm totally on the side of capitalism. But I also think that there are things that we should not put on sale. There are things that should be ring-fenced against the whole competitive market. All the things that we really treasure, where we want to have another attitude than simply the attitude of the market.
Yes.
And it's getting that right is the hardest part of conservatism for me.
Well, thank you so much for coming back to AEI, and I do urge everyone to read his books. All you have to do is Google Roger Scruton. In fact, do it on YouTube and just start watching the videos. There are several that are very short, and then you're going to watch ones that are longer and longer. You will acquire a philosophy of life, become enlightened and edified. This is his, well, I don't want to say most recent, because you've probably written one since, but it's Fools, Frauds, and Firebrands, and it comes highly recommended. So, Roger, thank you so much for being at AEI. And
well, yeah, thank you for inviting me. Yeah, it's great to be back here.